The early morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal as Dr. Sarah Mitchell's Tesla Model X rolled to a stop in the premium parking area. The clock on her dashboard showed 6:45 a.m., and she let out a tired sigh while gathering her things. The last 16 hours had been intense, even for someone with her experience. Sarah had just finished an emergency surgery that saved a young mother's life. The operation had been complicated, the kind that made even experienced surgeons nervous, but Sarah's steady hands and calm mind had guided her team through it successfully. Now, all she wanted was to get home to her own family in Atlanta. The terminal's glass walls reflected the rising sun as Sarah stepped out of her car. Her casual appearance, black night leggings, a loose-fitting cashmere sweater, and comfortable running shoes, didn't match most people's image of a leading neurosurgeon. But after standing in an operating room for 16 hours straight, comfort was her priority. Her curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup, showing the natural beauty of her dark skin. As she walked toward the terminal entrance, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her daughter Maya. "Mom, did the surgery go okay? Can't wait to see you." A smile crossed her tired face as she typed back a quick, "All went well, baby. See you soon." At 15, Maya was already talking about following in her mother's footsteps and becoming a doctor herself. The weight of her luxury handbag reminded Sarah of the 3 medical journals inside. Even when exhausted, she never stopped learning. 20 years into her career, with hundreds of successful surgeries behind her, she still read every new study and research paper she could find. This dedication had helped her become one of Johns Hopkins' most respected neurosurgeons and earned her numerous awards that hung modestly in her office. Sarah reached for her access card as she approached the terminal's entrance. The morning was quiet, with only a few other travelers visible through the glass doors, mostly older white men in business suits, probably heading to corporate meetings. She'd seen the same scene countless times over the years, being one of the few black women who regularly use private aviation services. Her pilot had already called to confirm the jet was ready. Thompson was one of the best pilots she worked with over the years, always professional and punctual. He knew her schedule could be unpredictable due to emergency surgeries, and he always accommodated her needs without complaint. The thought of the comfortable leather seat waiting for her on the plane made her smile again. As she walked, Sarah's mind drifted to the surgery she'd just completed. Maria Rodriguez, a 34-year-old mother of 3, had been rushed in with a brain aneurysm. The odds hadn't looked good at first, but Sarah had refused to give up. Now Maria would live to see her children grow up. These were the moments that reminded Sarah why she'd chosen this challenging career path. The clicks of her comfortable shoes echoed in the parking area as she approached the terminal's entrance. She could see the security guard inside, watching her through the glass doors. Something about his expression made her pause for a split second. She'd seen that look before, the mixture of suspicion and judgment that some people couldn't hide when they saw a black person in what they considered an unexpected place. Sarah straightened her shoulders slightly, a habit she'd developed over years of dealing with similar situations. Her hospital ID and flight documentation were readily accessible in her bag, though she shouldn't need them. Her biometric data was already in the terminal's system as a frequent flyer. Still, experience had taught her to always be prepared for extra scrutiny. As she reached for the door handle, Sarah remembered something her mother used to tell her. "Stand tall and know your worth, because dignity can't be given or taken away. It's something you carry inside." Those words had guided her through medical school, through her residency, and through countless situations where people underestimated or questioned her presence. They would guide her through whatever waited on the other side of these doors, too. James Whitaker stood behind his security desk, watching the woman approach through the glass doors. 6 months into his job at the private aviation terminal, he thought he knew all the regular clients. They were usually older white men in expensive suits, not young black women in workout clothes. His eyes narrowed as she reached for the door handle. The morning had been quiet until now. He greeted 3 CEOs and a famous businessman, checking their IDs quickly before letting them pass. But something about this woman made him uncomfortable. She carried herself with confidence, but in his mind, she didn't fit the usual profile of their clients. As Dr. Mitchell walked through the door, Whitaker stepped out from behind his desk. He was a tall man with graying hair and a security uniform that he wore like armor. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice sharp. This is a private terminal. The main passenger entrance is in the next building. Sarah stopped, her hand still holding her designer bag. She dealt with situations like this before, but it never got easier. "Good morning," she said calmly, reaching for her access card. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I have a flight scheduled for 7:30. Whittaker's face showed doubt. He looked at her casual clothes again, making no effort to hide his suspicion. "Ma'am, this terminal is for private jet clients only. Are you sure you're in the right place?" His tone was the kind people use when talking to children, slow and condescending. Behind Sarah, the glass doors opened again as another client entered, an older white man in a business suit. Whittaker smiled and nodded at him, waving him through without checking any documentation. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone present. "Yes, I'm quite sure," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. She pulled out her terminal access card and flight documentation. "Here are my credentials and flight details. My pilot, Captain Thompson, is expecting me." Whittaker took the documents but made a show of examining them with exaggerated care. "These could be anybody's," he said, shaking his head. "I'll need to make some calls to verify this. Please step aside while I confirm your story." A small crowd was gathering now. 2 terminal staff members watched from their desks, looking uncomfortable. Another client waiting for his flight stared openly at the scene unfolding before him. Sarah remained standing straight, her mother's words about dignity echoing in her mind. "That won't be necessary," Sarah said firmly. "My biometric data is in your system. You can simply scan my card or check my fingerprint." She gestured toward the biometric scanner on his desk, the same one he hadn't asked any other clients to use that morning. Whittaker ignored her suggestion. Instead, he picked up his phone, making a show of dialing numbers. "Security protocol," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We need to be extra careful these days, you understand." Sarah understood perfectly what was happening, but she remained composed. Her phone buzzed again, probably her pilot wondering why she hadn't arrived at the plane yet. The surgery's exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she stood firm. "Sir," she said, her professional tone carrying the authority of someone used to running emergency rooms and leading surgical teams. "I've been a client here for 5 years. I fly twice a month. You can check your records or call your manager." Whittaker's face reddened slightly at her tone, but he doubled down. "Ma'am, if you're really a client, you wouldn't mind waiting while we verify everything. Better safe than sorry." He emphasized the word "really" in a way that made his doubts clear. The terminal's early morning quiet had been replaced by uncomfortable tension. Another staff member had appeared, watching the scene with growing concern. A security camera above them recorded everything, its red light blinking steadily. What happened next would change not just Whittaker's day, but the entire company's future. The terminal manager's office door opened, and rapid footsteps approached. Someone had finally recognized exactly who was being held up at the security desk, and the consequences were about to unfold. The terminal manager, Robert Chen, practically ran across the polished floor. His face showed pure panic as he approached the security desk. He had just finished reading an important company memo about Dr. Mitchell when one of his staff rushed in to tell them about the situation at the front desk. "Dr. Mitchell," Robert called out, slightly out of breath. "I am so sorry about this delay." He turned to Whittaker, his voice sharp with authority. "James, what are you doing?" "This is Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She's one of our most valued clients." Whittaker's face began to change. The smug confidence that had been there moments ago started to crack. He looked down at the documents in his hands again, then back at Sarah, his mouth opening and closing without words coming out. "It's fine, Robert," Sarah said calmly, though her tiredness was now showing in her voice. "Your guard was just being thorough." She emphasized the last word in a way that made several onlookers shift uncomfortably. More people had gathered around them now. A young woman at the coffee counter was recording everything on her phone. 2 pilots standing near their gate watched with frowns on their faces. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. Robert stepped closer to Sarah, speaking quietly. "Dr. Mitchell, I just received the memo this morning about your appointment to the hospital board. The company is honored to have you as a client, especially now that you'll be overseeing the hospital's partnership with our aviation services." Whittaker's face turned pale. His hands, still holding Sarah's documents, began to shake slightly. The implications of what he'd done were starting to sink in. Partnership? He asked weakly, looking between Robert and Sarah. Yes, Robert explained, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent terminal. Dr. Mitchell is not only one of the country's leading neurosurgeons, but she's also the newly appointed head of the hospital board. Our company provides medical transport services to the hospital, and the board owns significant shares in our aviation group. Sarah stood quietly, watching as understanding dawned on Whittaker's face. She thought about all the times in her life she'd faced similar situations, in medical school, during her residency, even as an established surgeon. Each time, she had to decide how to respond. Whittaker started to speak, but his words failed him again. A tall man in a pilot's uniform hurried through the terminal doors. Dr. Mitchell, he called out, I was getting worried when you didn't arrive at the plane. Is everything okay? It was Captain Thompson, her regular pilot. There was a small delay with security, Thompson, Sarah replied, her voice professional but tired. I hope we're still on schedule. I just finished a 16-hour surgery, and my daughter is waiting for me in Atlanta. Captain Thompson looked confused for a moment, then understanding crossed his face as he took in the scene. He'd flown Dr. Mitchell dozens of times over the years, knowing her not just as a regular client, but as the surgeon who had saved his niece's life 2 years ago. Of course, Doctor. We're ready when you are, Thompson said, giving Whittaker a disapproving look. Robert quickly moved to escort Sarah himself, shooting stern glances at Whittaker. Please, Dr. Mitchell, let me walk you to your plane. And again, I cannot apologize enough for this incident. As they walked away, the crowd began to disperse, but the atmosphere remained charged. Whittaker stood frozen at his desk, still holding Sarah's documents, his face a mixture of shame and fear. He had just discriminated against not only one of their most important clients, but also a person who now held significant influence over his company's future. The young woman with the phone stopped recording and quickly typed something on her screen. Within minutes, the video would begin its journey across social media, adding another chapter to the ongoing conversation about racial bias and prejudice in everyday life. But for Sarah, this wasn't about social media or public shaming. As she walked toward her plane, she was already thinking about how this incident could lead to meaningful change. She had faced discrimination before, and each time, she chose to respond not with anger, but with purpose. Robert Chen led Dr. Mitchell toward her plane, but they hadn't gone far when another voice called out across the terminal. Sarah? Sarah Mitchell. The voice belonged to a tall man in an expensive suit who had just walked in through the VIP entrance. It was Michael Edwards, the CEO of the aviation company. His face showed surprise and delight at seeing her, but then confusion as he noticed the tense atmosphere in the terminal. Behind them, Whittaker had sunk into his chair, looking like he might faint. Michael, Sarah greeted him with a tired smile. I didn't expect to see you here today. I was just coming to meet with the board about our hospital partnership, Michael said. Then his expression changed as he looked around at the gathered crowd. Is everything all right? Robert, why do you look so upset? Before Robert could answer, another woman rushed into the terminal. It was Lisa Edwards, Michael's wife, and her eyes were filled with tears of joy when she saw Sarah. Without caring about the formal setting, Lisa ran forward and hugged her. Dr. Mitchell, we were coming to see you today at the hospital, Lisa said, wiping her eyes. We wanted to thank you in person for saving our Ashley's life last night, when they told us you were the surgeon operating on her. She couldn't finish the sentence as emotions overtook her. The terminal fell completely silent. Whittaker, who had started to stand up, fell back into his chair. His face had turned an ashen gray as he realized what was happening. Ashley is doing well, Sarah assured Lisa, patting her shoulder gently. The surgery was complex, but she's young and strong. She should make a full recovery. She didn't mention that she'd spent 16 hours in surgery, fighting to save their daughter's life. Michael stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Mitchell, when they brought Ashley in with that brain aneurysm, we were terrified. But when they said you were taking her case, I felt hope for the first time. Your reputation, well, you're the best in the country. Robert Chen looked like he might be sick. He turned to Whittaker, who was now staring at his desk, unable to meet anyone's eyes. James, he said quietly, do you understand now? Do you realize what you've done? The revelation rippled through the terminal. The security guard who had just questioned Sarah's right to be there, who had treated her with suspicion and disrespect, had done so to the woman who had spent the entire night saving the company CEO's daughter. "I didn't know," Whitaker whispered, but his words were lost in the heavy silence. Michael looked between Sarah and Whitaker, his expression darkening as he began to understand what had happened. "Robert, what's going on here? Why does everyone look so tense?" Sarah stepped forward before Robert could respond. Despite her exhaustion, her voice was clear and purposeful. "Michael, there was a small misunderstanding at security, but I think this gives us an opportunity to discuss something important." Lisa, still holding Sarah's hand, looked confused. "Misunderstanding? What happened?" The young woman who had recorded everything on her phone stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am, I have a video if you want to see." Sarah raised her hand gently. "That won't be necessary." She looked around the terminal, taking in everyone's faces, the embarrassed staff, the angry CEO, the devastated security guard, and the curious onlookers. In that moment, she made a decision about how to handle this situation. "Michael, Lisa," she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used in the operating room, "I'd like to schedule a meeting with your board. Not about what happened here today, but about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else tomorrow." The CEO nodded slowly, beginning to understand. His daughter's surgeon, the woman who had just saved his child's life, was showing more grace and wisdom than anyone might have expected. But then again, that's who Dr. Sarah Mitchell was. Someone who saw opportunities for healing even in the most difficult situations. The next hour in the terminal felt like the longest hour of James Whitaker's life. He sat at his security desk, watching as people whispered and pointed in his direction. The video of his confrontation with Dr. Mitchell had already started circulating among the terminal staff's phones, and with each passing minute, more people learned about his terrible mistake. In the private waiting area, Michael Edwards was reviewing the security footage on a tablet, his face growing darker with each moment. Lisa sat beside him, her hand covering her mouth in shock as she watched how the security guard had treated the woman who had just saved their daughter's life. "I want him fired," Michael said, his voice shaking with anger. "Immediately." He looked at Robert Chen, who stood nervously nearby. "How could this happen in our terminal?" Robert wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sir, Dr. Mitchell actually requested that we don't fire him." He paused, remembering her words. She said this could be a chance for real change, not just punishment. In another corner of the terminal, Dr. Mitchell sat in a comfortable chair, finally getting a moment to rest. She had called her daughter Maya to explain why she would be delayed. "Baby, sometimes life gives you a chance to make things better," she explained over the phone. "Even when you're tired, you have to take that chance." The young woman who had recorded the video approached Sarah cautiously. "Dr. Mitchell," she said softly, "I deleted the video. You're right, sharing it online wouldn't help anything." Sarah smiled at her, appreciating the young woman's understanding. Meanwhile, Whitaker sat at his desk, his security badge feeling heavy on his chest. Every few minutes, someone would walk past and give him a disapproving look. He thought about his job, his family, his mortgage. He had been so sure of himself just 2 hours ago, and now his whole world felt like it was crumbling. A group of pilots gathered near the coffee counter, talking in hushed voices. Captain Thompson stood with them, sharing stories about Dr. Mitchell, how she had saved his niece, how she never complained about late-night flights after emergencies, how she always treated everyone with respect. She performed surgery for 16 hours straight, Thompson told them, shaking his head, saved the CEO's daughter, and then had to deal with this nonsense just because. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lisa Edwards walked over to where Sarah sat and took her hand again. "I can't believe this happened to you," she said, her voice trembling. "After everything you did for Ashley, after everything you do for so many people." Sarah squeezed her hand gently. "Lisa, what happened today isn't just about me. It's about every person who's ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. That's why we need to handle this thoughtfully." In his office, Robert Chen was already drafting emails to the company's training department. Dr. Mitchell had suggested several respected diversity consultants who could help develop new programs. The cost would be high, but as Robert looked out at his terminal, he knew it would be worth it. Michael Edwards paced near the windows, making phone calls to board members. He wanted an emergency meeting to discuss Dr. Mitchell's suggestions for systematic changes. She's not asking us to punish one person, he explained to them. She's asking us to fix the system that allowed this to happen. Whitaker watched all of this happening around him, feeling smaller with each passing minute. But then something unexpected happened. Dr. Mitchell walked over to his desk, her face showing neither anger nor triumph. "Mr. Whitaker," she said quietly, "I have a question for you. Are you ready to learn and help others learn from what happened today?" He looked up at her, seeing not the woman he had profiled and disrespected earlier, but the accomplished surgeon and leader she had always been. In her face, he saw something he hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but an opportunity for redemption. "Yes," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Yes, Dr. Mitchell, I am." 1 week after the incident, Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat at the head of a long conference table in the aviation company's main office. Around her sat the company's board members, executives, and HR directors. The room was quiet as she began to speak, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to talk about what happened to me," she began, looking around the room. "I'm here to talk about what could happen to others if we don't make real changes." She opened a folder containing reports she had prepared, showing similar incidents from other companies. Michael Edwards, still grateful for his daughter Ashley's successful surgery, sat to her right. "Dr. Mitchell has already shared some excellent ideas for improvement," he told the board. "And I think we all agree that we need to listen." On a large screen behind them, Sarah showed statistics about discrimination in various industries. She had spent her few free hours between surgeries preparing this presentation, determined to turn one negative incident into lasting positive change. "Change doesn't come from firing one person," she explained, clicking to the next slide. "It comes from education, understanding, and creating new systems." She glanced at Whitaker, who sat quietly in the back of the room, taking notes. The security guard had surprised everyone by asking to be part of the change process. "I want to learn," he had told Sarah the day after the incident. "I want to help others avoid making the same mistakes I made." His humility had impressed her. Lisa Edwards, who had also joined the meeting, spoke up. "We need to understand why this happens and how to prevent it. Dr. Mitchell, you mentioned training programs." Sarah nodded and showed the next slide. "I've worked with several organizations that offer excellent diversity and inclusion training. But it's not just about one training session, we need ongoing education and clear protocols." The HR director, Janet Wong, was writing rapidly in her notebook. She had already started researching the programs Dr. Mitchell suggested. "We can begin implementation within 2 weeks," she reported. "And we'd like Dr. Mitchell to review our new security protocols." Robert Chen, who had been quiet until now, raised his hand. "We've already started making changes at the terminal. New verification procedures, better training for staff. But we need more." Sarah clicked to another slide showing a comprehensive plan. "Here's what I propose: mandatory quarterly training for all staff, new hiring practices that promote diversity, clear reporting procedures for any incidents, and regular audits of our security practices." The cost estimates on the screen made some board members shift uncomfortably, but Michael quickly spoke up. The cost of not making these changes would be far greater, both morally and financially. In the back of the room, Whitaker listened intently. The past week had been a journey of self-discovery for him. He had started reading books about unconscious bias, watching documentaries about racial discrimination, and really thinking about his own attitudes. "We also need to hear from our employees," Sarah continued, "especially those who might have faced similar situations but didn't speak up. We need to create an environment where everyone feels safe sharing their experiences." The company's legal team had prepared documents for new policies, which now sat in front of each person at the table. Sarah had reviewed them all, suggesting changes that would make them more effective and meaningful. "This isn't just about following rules," she explained, her voice passionate but controlled. "It's about changing mindsets. Every person who walks through our terminals, regardless of their appearance, deserves to be treated with respect." As she spoke, heads nodded around the table. Her words carried the weight of personal experience, but also the wisdom of someone who understood that real change requires more than just reaction to a single incident. "We have an opportunity here," Sarah concluded, looking at each person in the room. "We can either treat this as one unfortunate incident, or we can use it as a catalyst for real transformation. The choice is yours, but I'm here to help if you choose the path of genuine change." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Then Michael stood up, followed by others around the table. The message was clear. They were ready to do more than just apologize. They were ready to make real changes. 3 months after the incident, the private aviation terminal looked very different. New signs welcomed visitors in multiple languages, and the security desk had clear, professional protocols posted where everyone could see them. But the biggest changes weren't the ones you could see. They were in how people behaved. James Whittaker stood at his security desk, greeting a young woman in a hijab who was arriving for her flight. "Good morning, Dr. Rahman," he said warmly, checking her credentials quickly and efficiently. "Your flight is ready at Gate 3. The woman smiled, remembering how different her first visit had been 6 weeks ago. In the staff break room, a group of employees sat watching a training video. On the screen, Dr. Mitchell was explaining how unconscious bias affects decision-making. "Remember," her recorded voice said, "everyone has biases. The key is recognizing them and not letting them control our actions." Robert Chen walked through the terminal, conducting his daily observations. He noticed how the staff interacted with every client, the same professional courtesy, the same efficient service, regardless of who they were or how they looked. The change was remarkable. "The numbers don't lie," Janet Wong from HR was saying in her office, showing charts to Michael Edwards. "Customer satisfaction is up 30%. Employee morale has improved significantly, and we've had 0 reported incidents of discrimination since implementing the new programs." In another part of the building, a new employee orientation was taking place. Surprisingly, Whittaker was one of the trainers. He stood before the group, sharing his own story with remarkable honesty. 3 months ago, I made a terrible mistake," he told them. "I let my prejudices affect how I treated someone. But instead of firing me, Dr. Mitchell and this company showed me a better way. Now I have the chance to help others learn from my mistake." The new security protocols were simple but effective. Every client went through the same verification process, whether they were wearing a business suit or casual clothes, regardless of their race, gender, or appearance. The biometric system had been upgraded, making verification quick and fair for everyone. In the terminal's coffee shop, Lisa Edwards sat with Sarah, who had just finished another long surgery. They had become friends over the past months, with Lisa actively supporting the changes Sarah had proposed. "Ashley's doing great," Lisa said, showing Sarah pictures on her phone. "She's back in college now, thanks to you. And not just the surgery, what you did here, the changes you made, she tells everyone about it." Sarah smiled, watching the terminal's daily operations. A diverse group of clients moved through the space, all receiving the same professional treatment. The staff worked efficiently, their new training evident in every interaction. "The other aviation companies are asking about our program," Michael said, joining them with coffee. "They want to implement similar changes. You've started something big, Sarah." The company had created a new position, Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and filled it with someone who had experience in both aviation and cultural awareness training. Monthly reports showed steady improvement in every area they measured. Even the small things had changed. The magazines in the waiting area now represented diverse interests and cultures. The food options in the terminal cafe included halal and kosher choices. The artwork on the walls celebrated aviation pioneers from various backgrounds. "It's not perfect yet," Sarah admitted, watching a new group of employees attending their training session. "Change takes time, but we're moving in the right direction." In his office, Robert Chen reviewed the latest customer feedback forms. Comments praised the professional, respectful service. Many noted how welcome they felt, regardless of their appearance or background. The terminal had become a model for others in the industry. Whittaker, finishing his training session, looked out at the busy terminal. He remembered the day he had almost lost everything because of his prejudices. Now, he was helping others avoid the same mistakes. He saw Dr. Mitchell across the terminal and nodded respectfully. She had shown him that change was possible, not through punishment, but through education and understanding. The terminal buzzed with activity as another busy day continued. But now, every person who walked through those doors could expect the same thing: respect, professionalism, and fair treatment. It wasn't just policy anymore. It had become part of the culture. 6 months after the incident, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood at a podium in a large conference hall. In front of her sat representatives from aviation companies across the country. They had all come to learn about what was now known as the Mitchell Protocol, a comprehensive approach to eliminating bias in private aviation services. Change doesn't happen overnight, Sarah began, looking out at the eager faces. But it does happen when we choose to learn from our mistakes. She glanced at James Whitaker, who now sat in the front row, ready to share his part of the story. The conference room was packed. News of the terminal's transformation had spread throughout the industry. Their customer satisfaction ratings had reached record highs, and other companies wanted to know their secret. 6 months ago, I was just a tired surgeon trying to get home, Sarah continued, showing slides of the terminal's changes. Today, we're showing the aviation industry that treating everyone with respect isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. In the audience, Michael Edwards nodded proudly. His company had become a leader in inclusive practices, and their profits had actually increased. Other CEOs leaned forward, taking notes as Sarah had explained the practical steps they had taken. Whitaker stood up when it was his turn to speak. The room fell silent. Everyone had heard about the security guard who had started this journey. I'm not proud of who I was 6 months ago, he began honestly, but I'm very proud of who we've become. Back at the terminal, the changes had become part of daily life. New employees went through comprehensive training before they ever interacted with clients. Regular audits ensured that everyone followed the same fair procedures. The staff had become like a family, supporting each other in maintaining their high standards. Maya, Sarah's daughter, sat in the conference audience, beaming with pride. She had watched her mother turn a hurtful incident into a movement for change. Mom, she had said that morning, you didn't just fix one terminal, you're fixing the whole system. The terminal's success story had caught the attention of other industries too. Hotels, restaurants, and retail chains had started asking about implementing similar programs. Sarah now spent some of her free time consulting with companies that wanted to make real changes in how they treated people. This isn't just about airports or airlines, Sarah had explained to the audience. It's about creating spaces where everyone feels valued and respected. It's about training people to see beyond their first impressions. Lisa Edwards, sitting with her daughter Ashley in the audience, wiped tears from her eyes. Ashley had fully recovered from her surgery and had become an advocate for change at her college. Dr. Mitchell saved more than my life, she often told people. She showed us how to be better. At the back of the room, Robert Chen showed visitors their latest technology, a new security system that combined efficiency with fairness. Every client follows the same process, he explained. No exceptions, no special treatment, no discrimination. The young woman who had almost posted the video of the incident online now worked at the terminal's communications department. She helped share positive stories about their changes, showing how respect and professionalism had become their standard practice. Success isn't measured just in numbers, Sarah concluded her speech, showing their impressive statistics. It's measured in how people feel when they walk through our doors. Everyone deserves to feel respected, valued, and welcome. The audience stood and applauded as Sarah finished speaking, but she wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. Next week, she would help launch similar programs at 3 other airports. The month after that, she would consult with a major hotel chain. Whitaker, now a certified trainer in diversity and inclusion, looked around the room filled with industry leaders. He remembered his moment of shame 6 months ago, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become the starting point of something important. As the conference ended, Sarah checked her phone. She had surgery scheduled for the next morning. She smiled, thinking about how much had changed. One incident, handled with wisdom rather than anger, had sparked a movement that was still growing. The Mitchell Protocol had become more than just a set of rules. It was proof that positive change was possible, that people could learn and grow, and that sometimes the best response to discrimination wasn't punishment, but education and understanding.